Anita, welcome to the Rights for Women Convo Couch.
Mandangu, thank you.
You actually were on quite a few years ago now with my previous co-host, and you were talking about plotting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
So that episode is still available for anyone out there listening. You can tune into that as well. So fabulous to have you on. And I'd love to start by talking about Tiddas, because that is, I think, your most recent sort of thing that's out in the world.
Yeah.
And it has been transformed from a novel, from fiction, into drama, into a stage play. So can you tell us a little bit about how that came about and what it was like to see that brought to life on the stage?
Well, can I start by saying it was probably the most challenging writing experience of my professional career, but also one of the most fulfilling as well. So I was asked by Nadine McDonald-Dowd from then at QPAC, and Sonia Simic, who was then with Le Bois as a cultural producer there, creative producer there, if I wanted to adapt the novel Tiddas, which came out in 2014, to theatre. And it made sense because we're in Brisbane and it's a very Brisbane novel. It's been described as a love letter to Brisbane. And so I had no idea, I had no aspirations ever to write for the theatre, and I had no idea what I was doing. Obviously, I go to the theatre, and going to the theatre and watching a performance, I now have so much greater respect for everything that goes on behind the scenes, because we just go and enjoy it. So what happens is, the difference with writing fiction and theatre is, in the novel, as your listeners and yourself will know, is you write all the details. You write what the character can see, what they can smell, what they touch, what they taste, what they think, and so forth. You can write a novel without dialogue, but a play is pretty much all dialogue. It's the show and don't tell. So I had to learn how to turn the novel into literally dialogue. And it took me many drafts to finally understand what I was actually supposed to be doing. And I was so tied to the original story that at one point Nadine, who was my dramaturg, said to me, I don't want to see that novel in here again. I had all these sticky things in there going, and she goes, don't bring that here. You're allowed to actually create new material and so forth. And then you learn from the actors, because the actors bring their own experience and their own wisdoms to each of their characters. And I had no idea that they go right into the backstory and they think about the characters that they've been allotted or chosen. Yeah. They think about, why would the character be sitting here? What is their backstory? So it was really fascinating to be in the rehearsal room as well, to see all that unfold. But for me, one of the challenges was, when you're writing a novel, it's you and your editor, and possibly your publisher might give you some feedback. When you're in this space, you've got your dramaturg, the creative producer, maybe the artistic director of the company, then all the actors want to give you feedback on their characters. So it's quite confronting, because
kind of not yours anymore, is it really? It's a collaborative.
It is. And I can tell you, I'm not a team player. So but it was so joyful. And then to see the first dress rehearsal, at the last scene, I just was so overwhelmed with emotion, because what the actors had done, and the set was extraordinary, and all the lighting and the music, it just brought together the meaning of the novel. And I just sobbed and sobbed. And interestingly, we had a fantastic season as part of the Brisbane Festival. And I would walk out, I went to nearly every single show, and women would just be crying. And that's the difference in theatre, is you see the immediate reaction of audiences to your work. And so that was quite extraordinary. And I said, I'm never writing another play, because it's quite challenging. And Jane Harrison, who came on as a dramaturg as well, she said, yeah, you just wait to opening night and closing night when you're getting standing ovation, and then tell me you're not going to write another. It's a really different experience, a beautiful experience.
So have you changed your mind? Could you potentially write another play?
Not just yet, but it's not completely off the table now.
Excellent, excellent. And will that be touring, Anita? Is it going to be coming to other places?
I will tell you, first of all, I never had a dream to write a play, and then I didn't have a dream for it to tour, but of course all that changed, and we'd love that. It's a big cast, and of course most of the cast are First Nations, so it requires actors on the ground, or it's quite expensive to bring people in and 4 weeks of rehearsals and 3 or 4 weeks of the play and so forth, and we had quite a stunning set. So that all impacts whether or not theatres can take it. There's been some conversations with the theatre in Sydney, so hopefully we might get it up in Sydney, which would be wonderful.
Oh, I hope so. I'd love to be able to see it. It'd be fantastic.
I think there's a little theatre down your way called Anita, isn't it?
There's Anita's Theatre, which is actually, they have a lot of great bands and things on. Yeah.
Right. Is it Corrimal? Where is that?
It's at Dharawal.
Dharawal.
So it's beautiful. It's all like Art Deco, and they've kept all the original.
Maybe we could just do a reading in Dharawal. That could
yes,
be fun.
please. Yes, please. But you do write across a lot. You have written across a lot of genres, Anita, in both nonfiction and fiction, and then so many different genres within the fiction range. But can you talk a little bit about how your ideas come to you, and then how do you decide then, once you get a spark of an idea, then what form it will take? What's that creative process like for you?
It's interesting because a few years ago, I gave a keynote at an Australian booksellers dinner in Melbourne, and the theme of the conference was conversations. And it was quite easy for me to pull something together, because when I thought about that, I realised that many of my books are born out of conversations. So either conversations that I've overheard, for example, Yira and a Deadly Dog Demon was the idea for that novel came from a conversation I overheard between an American tourist and an Australian on a flight to LA, talking about real Australians and so forth.
Okay.
And there's conversations about me that have triggered some work. For example, I loathe to mention his name, but Andrew Bolt writing a conversation about me that I wasn't part of, became part of Am I Black Enough for You? I was on the phone to David Rankin, who's an Australian artist, married to author Lily Brett, and I was in Manhattan. I was staying in their loft. And I said, I need to write a novel set here. And that became Manhattan Dreaming. There's other moments I have observations. I never have to sit down and think, what am I going to write? So if I think about Bila Yarrudhanggalangdhuray, which is a novel about the Great Flood of Gadigal, I had that idea when I watched the unveiling of the statues of Yari and Jackie in Gadigal in 2017. And I'm watching that online. I'm thinking, how is it that the nation doesn't know about these Wiradjuri heroes, these national heroes? And how don't they know about the Great Flood of Gadigal? So that I knew that I was going to write a novel. I'd been commissioned to write a novel set in the 19th century on Wiradjuri country, but I had no idea what the story was going to be. So I go, there's my opening. 6 months later, I start learning my language in Wagga, and I go, right, I'm going to put as much of the language into the novel as possible as a reminder to readers that everywhere they walk in Australia, they walk on land that has a first language, and it's not English. And then my novels today are about, always through my lens as a contemporary Koori woman and living in Yuggera country now. And I want all of them have a purpose. All of the stories have a purpose, a greater goal of imparting knowledge, of sharing history and life in contemporary Australia through my lens. And depending on the story, that will determine whether it's a kid's novel. So I've just released Koori Princess through Magabala. So is it a kid's novel? Is it going to be an historical novel like Barbed Wire and Cherry Blossoms, which I had the idea for that at Pearl Harbor, and that's about World War II and the Cowra breakout. Or whether it's not, it's going to be a memoir, for example, Am I Black Enough for You? I haven't actually written a lot of nonfiction. I am on my way to Paris. I will be doing 59 libraries in 59 days and 59,000 words. So I will document something around that. Every book has sprung from an observation or a conversation of some kind.
Yeah, and it's fantastic that you've never felt confined by a box in terms of I have to stick with this genre or I have to stay in this lane. I think it's wonderful that you've branched out and just whatever has taken your creative inspiration at the moment, that's what you've gone with.
Oh, can I tell you, I would, if I just want, thank you first for that. Really, the goal has always been just to find the genre. I just need to find one that I feel comfortable doing well. And I don't know, I really like writing historical fiction. It's such hard work. It's like a PhD. I really like writing kids fiction. For me, it's much easier. Writing 12,000 words and so forth is so much easier than 130,000 words, and making sure you've got as much authenticity and use the facts around history in the most genuine way you can.
I think just keep going with the cross-genre stuff. It's fantastic. Once you start on a project, so let's take, for instance, Bila. Okay, I'm going to let you say the title of the book.
Bila Yarrudhanggalangdhuray, and I'll just explain it. So Bila means river, Yarrudhang means dream, Galang is the plural, so having many dreams, and Dhuray is the action of having the many dreams.
Okay.
Yes, it's quite, our grammar system is quite difficult and unique, I should say.
Yeah, it's really interesting. But so when, for instance, you started, that is a historical novel, and as you say, I imagine there must have been a huge amount of research that you had to do.
Yeah.
When you sat down to actually start writing the story, what's your process, Anita, in terms of your writing? Are you a daily writer? Do you have word counts? How do you get from the beginning to the end, basically?
Okay. I will say that for all of my novels, whether it's historical novel or chick lit or kids novels, and all of them have the same process, and that is I start with a synopsis, and I learnt that very late in life. So if you're a writer and you want some tips, write your synopsis first, because when you can clarify in that synopsis what the story is about right through to the ending, then actually plotting the story and writing the story and researching the story is that much easier. So I start with a synopsis. Maybe it's a page, maybe it's 300 words, 1,000 words, 300 words, bring it back to 25 words for the lift pitch in case you're in the lift with the head honcho of Simon & Schuster. Then I go through my character breakdowns, who are the key characters, all idiosyncrasies and what do they wear, what do they look like. Then I do my research, as much as my research in the field and desktop as possible to do my research, and then I'll map it out. I'll plot it all out. And as we've mentioned, there's a podcast on plotting. Yep. So I map the whole story out. Then I fill in the gaps with more research. I get feedback on relevant pages. If I've mentioned living people, I try to give them an opportunity always to check what I've written about them, or language, I'll get that checked. So I use the same process. I work in chunks of time. I'm not someone who'll get up one day a week and do it. I will set aside a week or 2 weeks or a month or 6 weeks, like with Perouse, and every day I will write, and I'll never write more than 5 hours a day, because I did read back in the 90s when I was doing my PhD, I read something about, in terms of a PhD, if you do 5 solid hours a day, that's about the best that your brain can manage. So I stuck with that with my writing. So I'll write. I'm an early morning writer, so I'll get up in early morning. I set a word limit or count or goal. I aim for 2,000 words plus. I write fast, but what I'll tell you, particularly for your listeners, is that if you have done the research and if you have mapped the book out, then the writing comes quite easy, because you already know if you get stuck in chapter 2, you've got what's going to happen in chapter 14. So you could skip up there and then come back. That's what I normally do. And I will say the best investment I've ever made, and a tip for your listeners as well, is the best advice I got back with my first novel was to get a structural edit done. So I got a structural edit done on Not Meeting Mr. Right, which was my first adult novel. And I had sent it off to Random House originally in my first draft. And they said, this is about 3 drafts away from what we would normally look at or publish. And I had no idea. So I was so grateful just for that advice. I sent it to Nicola O'Shea for a structural edit. I did everything she suggested I do. And then when I resubmitted it, it went to 4 publishers. When I resubmitted it, Random took it, and it was almost ready for publication. So my advice is that is the best investment I've ever made. So I sent Avoiding Mr. Right to her as well. And her advice back to me was, Anita, you don't have to take on board everything I say, because your publisher, your editor might have a different idea. And so I went, you know what, I'm just going to take on board what I like. And then I submitted that. And everything that the publishing house wanted me to change was everything that...
Oh, really?
Yeah. So lesson learned there, because what I did is I wasted a whole lot of time anyway. So I just done, because that's their job. Their job is to help you structure the story the best it can be, not necessarily change your words or your intent, but help you structure it. So that's my tip. I send everybody to Janet Hutchinson now. She's worked as a structural editor on most of my most recent books, and she's brilliant.
Okay.
Do that before you send your book off.
Great advice. And as you say, and you're paying in terms of money, but it's saving you so much time and getting you closer to where you need to be to pitch it.
It's an investment.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, sure. Let's just talk a little bit about your memoir in Am I Black Enough for You, which was recently republished, and I've recently read. It's fabulous to actually really just see the whole of your career mapped out that way in that memoir. And you said this, I want to use my published words across genres as a vehicle for asserting my individual and communal identity, to instill pride in others and to help non-Aboriginal people better understand us. I hope in turn that we can all then improve our understanding of ourselves and our collective Australian identity. So can you talk a little bit, Anita, about how your culture and heritage have informed your writing, both in terms of reacting to people's perceptions of you and also in terms of the messages that you want to get across through your writing?
It's the reacting thing, which is interesting in that question for me, because I was socialised as an Aboriginal person as a child in primary school, which you would have read, being told by non-Indigenous people in very racist ways who I was, that I was Black. And I wasn't until I was 38, I think I was 38, doing a radio interview, possibly around Not Meeting Mr. Right or one of those books, that I realised that much of my writing to that date was in reaction to the stereotypes around Aboriginality and how we were supposed to be and look and behave and the things we aspired to and so forth. So over the course of my writing and my teaching career, so I did lots of work in schools from primary right through to year 12, I saw huge gaps in the knowledge in the classroom, not just of students, but of teachers themselves, which was more distressing. And I saw a need to provide stories and resources to help break down those stereotypes around identity and who we are, particularly in the 21st century. And I used, and I continue to use, as my own life experiences about growing up off Wiradjuri country, born and bred in Gadigal country, raised on Bidjigal country out near Perouse. I've always known who I am. I've known who my mob are, and learning what I should have been my first language at the age of 50 also gave me a deeper sense of culture, but also a deeper desire to educate and form, engage, and bring others into the stories of place and purpose and power, because having cultural knowledge is being empowered. So for me, I use particularly my fiction, because book clubs read novels, and they say, I think I don't know if you've heard this, there's some saying or statistic, an author said this, I think, that if women stopped reading, 80% of fiction would die.
Oh, I'm sure that's true. Yeah. Women from, I think, about 40 up are the highest demographic for buying books. Yeah.
And I can tell you, I get invited to speak at lots of book clubs. None of them are book clubs with men. How can I best reach women or readers issues and themes, and helping them to understand in a non-confrontational way, which reading provides. Theatre less so, because you're in a space with other people and reactions are obvious. And so I try to use my novels in particular, and kids' novels, to get as many messages out as possible, and information that is meant for the public domain. And also for your listeners who are thinking about writing in the space, you may research, you may be told things. It doesn't mean that everything that you learn about Indigenous culture in this country is for the public domain or for you to share publicly. So if you are working in that space, be sure and check with whoever you're working with that they're happy for the information they give you to be used in the public domain.
Yeah, good advice. And while we're on that, Anita, and I know that you do talk about this in Am I Black Enough For You, and it's something that comes up. I've had numerous conversations about this in writing circles, about the issue of non-Indigenous writers writing First Nations or Indigenous characters, and there are varying opinions about that. But what's your take on that? And what would you suggest for listeners who maybe have a story which involves some First Nations characters?
You are correct in saying there are very diverse views on this. I'm going to start by saying, if you believe you are writing the great Australian novel, then you cannot write it without including First Nations Australia, because anywhere you set that novel is on unceded country that has people and stories and language and culture and dance and song and history. So every novel set in Australia has that, and it needs to acknowledge that. So you can't write the great Australian novel without that, in my view. I'm sure all those Australian authors that have run the Miles Franklin or won lots of awards without First Nations content will argue. That's my position.
Yeah, I had a little bit of a conversation with that recently with Holly Ringland, and her in both The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart and her recent book, Seven Skins of Esther Wilding. And she actually does use the correct Indigenous place names and refers to it quite often. And when I asked her about that recently, she said she will always, as you said, include that in her books because she doesn't want to be part of the whitewashing of Australian.
Holly's amazing, and I'm glad that you had that conversation with her, and I love her work. I would also say people should read Alex Miller, Journey to the Stone Country, one close to the great Australian novel. I would say Kate Granville, Secret River. Yeah, and but the flip side is, I would say, if you have no pre-existing or little no or little relationship or experience of First Nations Australia, then you should probably steer clear of it altogether, rather than trying to do something tokenistic or half-assed or whatever. I have so many people who contact me about having finished their manuscript and now they want to slot in a Black character somewhere. That's not how it works. If you are going to do it properly, within your synopsis and within your research and within your mapping out of your book, all that needs to be inclusive, right? So that it has meaning and purpose, not because you're wanting to tick a box and potentially do the right thing, because having this tokenistic character that has no real relationship with anybody else is not doing it properly.
And what about in terms of, because I have had this with particularly one of my students who I teach writing, and one of my students wrote a fantastic YA book. The main character, however, was Indigenous, and she's not. That's been a bit of a red flag in publishing circles. What's your take on that?
Oh, it depends on, I know I have people in my world, like a lot of my writing buddies in Brisbane in particular are non-Indigenous people who are around blackfellas all the time, who have relationships with blackfellas. I think it's about there's a few things there. What is your intent? What is your actual life experience? I don't know that many people could do it well unless they've done it in some kind of partnership. And I think my questions as a publisher would have been like, how are you informed? How have you been informed to be able to, what informed this character? What experiences have you had? And why are you making this character, your main character, an Indigenous person?
Yeah.
I think it's asking the author always why. And they need to be able to clarify that for themselves. What is your purpose? What is your intent? Is the character empowered? I had somebody email me about one of their characters, and it was YA. One of their characters was Indigenous and came from a broken home and all this dysfunction. And I just lost my shit. I'm like, why can't the white character come from dysfunction? Why are you creating a character that feeds into the stereotypes? When I ran a workshop in Melbourne years ago about white people wanting to write Indigenous characters. And I said, on one side of the whiteboard, write all the stereotypes you've ever heard about Black people. I kid you not, I saw things I hadn't even heard of before. I was shocked and I thought I'd heard everything. And then on the other side, I said, let's write all the positive stereotypes that we know about Indigenous Australia. And so I said, see this bad side? You don't need to do any of that. That's done to death. The media does that. Let's change the narrative. And why is it only Indigenous people are writing about us working and living and just being in positions of excellence, which is what I see every day, from school kids right through to CEOs and so forth. So I think non-Indigenous authors really need to look at themselves and the way that they view Indigenous Australia today, because we all write through a lens, we all read through a lens, and people need to be conscious of that. And I would say to readers, if you want to read YA with Indigenous characters, read books by blackfellas. Yeah. We've got over 7,000 published Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander authors. You need to be reading our work first and foremost. Not to say that white people don't do it. You need to be reading our books, looking at us through our lenses.
Yeah, I love that chapter in your memoir where you've got the 20 reasons for reading Black, and it's great. I'm still catching up, but I've read quite a few books by Indigenous authors, and when I read that, I thought, wow, yes, there's all these reasons, and we just need to promote it more, because as you say, there's so many out there, like 7,000 published authors to choose from.
Cross genres. Yeah. I often say, I do a lot of teacher PD, and I'm like, I pride myself on being able to find almost a book or a poem, a novel, a play, a memoir on almost any subject that is written by or co-written in a collaboration with an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander author. Brilliant. So it's possible. People need to check out Black Words on Auslit.
Black Words Auslit. I'm going to put these links in the show notes for everyone. Yeah. Getting on to another issue that comes up in writing circles that we've all experienced, probably, if you're listening out there. One of your early books, Anita, Sacred Cows, was rejected multiple times before being picked up by Magabala Books and published in 1996. And that whole rejection process is part of the writing life, but it can be very crippling, and it can stop people writing. It can stop you pursuing that goal or that dream. What advice would you give to writers out there who may have experienced rejection or may be experiencing it and are feeling, what's the point?
You're absolutely right. It is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Like when you get the bad review and you're like, oh, it's so heartbreaking, because we all know how much work we put into whatever the project is, right? I would say first and foremost, everything is subjective. So whoever's reading your work it's all subjective. So someone might get through 2 pages, someone might absolutely love it. So it's not personal. It's never personal. Again, everybody's reading, they're all reading through lenses, and publishers are about making money, right? So they're also looking, a lot of publishers are looking for, is this going to turn us a profit? All right. I used to have this argument, authors are writing because we want to change the world and we have all these beautiful things we want to say, and publishers are going, oh, can we make some money? Not all of them. It's a business.
Yeah,
So don't take it personally. What I will say is, like, Not Meeting Mr. Right was my first break into commercial publishing, and that was sent to 4 publishers, I think I mentioned. I only needed, and I'd already had the structural edit done, and Larissa Edwards at Random House took the book, and as I mentioned, that edit I know made the difference. Okay, but what I would say to your authors is, do the homework, see what is already in the marketplace, know what publishers are publishing the kind of book that you are writing or have written. Read their websites about what they're accepting and in what format. Do not submit something that they're not asking for. Waste of time, waste of paper, waste of energy, waste of money. Okay. Yeah. Don't jazz it up on pink pages. Stick to what they want, whatever, double-sided, whatever font, whatever they want, synopsis, 4 chapters. I would not send anything to a publisher that I hadn't finished, because if you send off your first 3 chapters and they love it and they're like, where's the rest of it? You're screwed. Finish the manuscript first, get your structural report done. In your cover letter to the publisher, tell them what's enclosed, have your synopsis, if that's what they ask for. Let them know that you've had a structural report done and by whom. Now, I've got to give some hard love to your listeners, because the thing is, I don't know why, of all the art forms and of all the careers and all the skills in the world, writing seems to be the one that everybody thinks they can do. You know, they don't like, oh, everyone's a writer. We can't all be plumbers. We can't all be forklift drivers. We can't all fly planes, but apparently everyone can write a novel. It's not the case. And it's also not the case that everybody wants to read your story. As horrible as that sounds, yes, everyone has a story, but why does someone have to read yours? Okay. And if you're not a reader, why do you think someone will read your book? Because I can't tell you how many people will say, oh, they want to write a book. I've got a story, want to write a book. And I go, okay, what are you reading at the moment? Oh, I don't read.
I know, that cracks me up.
Why the hell would someone read your book if you can't be bothered reading someone else's book? So it's important to understand that. I'd love to sing, but for some reason, I can't, but everybody thinks everyone can write. And I'm really sorry to say this, but while it is subjective at a publishing level, if you send your manuscript out to 20 publishers and they don't buy it or whatever, and you've done all the right things, then maybe writing isn't your gig. Having said that, we all know that Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling sent her manuscript to everybody and got turfed out, and then look at the phenomenon. But I think that's quite rare.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe it's not the right thing at that time. Maybe you'll write something else and that will be the thing that you find a publisher for.
Absolutely. I think also for some people writing, I think we look at Holly, we look at Tara June Winch, and I absolutely believe they've got the gift. Right? I think, and then there's people like me who have a really small vocab, who have to work really hard. I think there are people who have a gift, there are people who work really hard. It is long hours of practice. It is like learning an instrument. You just don't sit down and play it. You have lessons and do the PD and so forth like that.
The next thing I wanted to ask you about, Anita, was this whole idea of genre versus literary fiction. 2007, you released Not Meeting Mr. Right. It was followed in 2008 by Avoiding Mr. Right, and then 2 books, Manhattan Dreaming and Paris Dreaming, which were classified, I guess, at the time, which is a term we don't tend to use now in the industry, but chick lit, which
what do we use now? What's used now?
I think it's just women's fiction, or it goes into romance or whatever. But yeah, chick lit seems to be out for some reason. Rom-coms, if they've got a bit of humor in them. Rom-com, that's definitely a particular genre. And a couple of questions around that. Was writing that particular genre a deliberate move for you to get into that part of the publishing world? And then how do you feel, because you do talk a little bit about this in Am I Black Enough for You too, this kind of divide between genre fiction and literary fiction, and some of the snobbery, I guess, that's in the industry about people who write genre fiction.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a strategy. I remember lying down River Beach reading over a summer some of my favorite, and unfortunately now not with us, authors like Rosie Scott and Georgia Blaine. And I was like, I just love their novels. But I never saw women like me. So there was a strategy about writing women like me in the city, not though I write literary fiction. I didn't know what I was writing. I didn't know I was writing genre fiction. I was learning. But the strategy was, in choosing to write commercial women's fiction, was to reach audiences that weren't previously engaging with Aboriginal Australia in any format, either personally or professionally or even subconsciously. And it is the non-Indigenous female market that obviously is my key audience, because there's not enough of us as blackfellas to sustain any large publishing venture, least of all an entire genre. Now, with that in mind, I did make the conscious decision to move into the area of commercial women's fiction, as you've mentioned, and I did 4 books in 5 years called, back then, as we say, chick lit, or as my friends at Koori Radio 93.7 FM called it, chocolate, because the main characters were all blackfellas. Yep. And I made no secret back then, and even now, of my intentions in penning, so not meeting Mr. Right, avoiding Mr. Right, Manhattan Dreaming and Paris Dreaming. But I did hear whispers, interestingly, that I was dumbing down. This is where the offence to the author and the reader comes in. I was dumbing down my writing and betraying readers of my serious work. But those who criticised the genre, they missed the point of the efforts that I've made as a First Nations writer in Australia to broker new relationships, new publishing ground, and enter an incredibly difficult space as a minority in mainstream publishing. Because I can tell you, I don't know how many, if any, romance books still today have Black women or men in them. And I've spoken at the Romance Writers Australia conference about this many years ago, about diversity in Australian romance writing. So I'd hazard a guess that there are more Aboriginal women now reading my novels than reading any Indigenous authored academic books, unless they are working in academia themselves. Now, in terms of that literary divide, all fiction is fiction, right? I hate this hierarchy, this literary hierarchy where Westerns is on the bottom of the rung of the ladder, the literary ladder, and chick lit is when nobody writes Westerns anymore. I've got a book coming out in July next year through Audible called Rodeo Dreaming. Yeah, it was so much fun. I always wanted to go to a rodeo. Yeah. But I unpack a whole lot of things about cruelty to animals in that as well. But there's romance and sex and fun and so forth. But so Westerns at the bottom and romance just the one rung above that. And your readers will probably understand this, that if Jane Austen was the original chick lit author, if she published now her books, and this has been in the press, her books would have pink covers and sparkles and so forth, and they would look like romance books today. The reality is people read differently. We don't all read the same way. All reading matters. And I think by dissing a genre, and I have been at the Sydney Writers' Festival some years ago and sat in a space with hundreds of people with an Australian author just trashing romance, going, I think she was introduced as a romance writer and she lost her shit. She's, I am not a romance writer. I've never been so offended. And by doing that, she offended every romance writer and every reader of romance in the room. So I think when you diss a genre, whatever that genre is, you are disrespecting the craft of writing, you're disrespecting the author, and you're disrespecting the reader of that work, all in one punch. And I think we need to be really careful about judging the way and what people read.
Yeah, no, agree 100% with everything you've said. And hopefully that message is starting to filter out, but I don't know, we'll see. So I just wanted to talk a little bit more about your experience of learning your own language and then using that in the writing of Bila Yarrudhanggalangdhuray. That was completely wrong. But yeah, can you talk about what that experience was like for you as somebody who for the first time really was learning your traditional language and then being able to put that into your writing?
Interestingly, as I've mentioned, I didn't start learning my language till I was 50, literally 50 that year. And I was in a position of both. I was in a privileged position because I was in a space on country learning by Dr. Uncle Stan Grant, all his proteges, all his Wiradjuri proteges, in a space with other Wiradjuri people, but non-Indigenous people as well, and other elders. But there was I had to acknowledge that I was in a privileged space because I'm in a tertiary institution supported by a university, learning a language that my mother, who was born on a Rambi mission in Cowra, and all my family born in Brungle, were not allowed to speak. and did not. Okay, so there were moments of tears around that, with that understanding that absolute privilege when it shouldn't be a privilege. But also I felt so grateful that I could learn and be able to share that. And so for your listeners who don't know, Bila Yarrudhanggalangdhuray was the first commercial novel in Australia to not have an English title, to have an Aboriginal language as a title, Wiradjuri language as a title, with the English translation on the back. So that had never happened before. It's all very exciting, but also a reminder that it was 2021 when that happened. So it's
for anyone watching on video, you can see the gorgeous cover there.
Yeah, so it's and the goanna on the cover, and the cover, you can't judge a book by cover, we know that, but the cover is meant to demonstrate or speak to the contents. We've got a beautiful gugar up there, a goanna that my cousin Lukey Penrith did. We've got that's our totem. We've got the white cockatoo, which is the totem of the late Kerry Reid Gilbert, who was a very close friend of mine. And so that's the totem of the mother in the novel. And that's an actual picture of the Murrumbidgee and Murrumbidgee Bila. And for me, being able to share language in that novel is extraordinary. And of course, it's a fantastic reading by Pamela Shelton. So people can actually listen to the novel and follow along. And it's, as again I mentioned, I want readers to be reminded that everywhere they walk in Australia, they walk on land that has a fixed language. All my novels from here on in will be the same. We'll have all that. The original novel for Tiddas was 2014, but we got to, because of the play we're updating, I was able to weave some language into the play as well. And I had, interestingly, people from Wagga who came up, and Griffith and Bathurst, Wiradjuri people, and they, as we're walking out, I didn't know everybody, obviously, I knew lots of people, but they were singing out as they go upstairs in language and so forth. And we need to see ourselves in the Australian narrative, and that it's inclusive of language as well.
Yeah, because language is such a crucial part of identity, isn't it?
It's a part. I think it's an important part. It's a part that we were denied through policies of assimilation and under acts of protection, where children were removed and meant to start behaving white and be more like white people, because bad people were black people and good people were white people. And language was a demonstration of being black.
Do you think that's just looking maybe towards the next decade of publishing from First Nations authors? And we've talked about how many there are, and there's so many award-winning books, but do you think that's the direction that Indigenous writing will take, you incorporating more language, or where do you see that going?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a renaissance in Indigenous literature now, First Nations literature now. I think we've got so many, our voices are being sought after in a whole range of areas. And I think there's also strong language reclamation happening across the country. We're in the United Nations International Decade of Indigenous Languages, which started this year. So over the next 10 years, internationally, the profile and awareness and support for language maintenance is happening. I did have a non-Indigenous author approach me at an event and saying, I'm so glad you put that on your title, because I want to use language on the title of my book. And I was like, why? I have a reason. It's my language. So I feel like I'm going to have to do some more publisher PD around this, because it's not an open slather for, again, non-Indigenous people appropriating any part of our culture that they think will sell their work. That's not what it's about. It's about, again, what's the intent, what's the purpose, and what is your relationship to that?
Fabulous. It's been such a joy to talk to you. I do have just two more quick questions for you, Anita. You do mention Oprah as a great role model in your memoir, and I fully endorse that, because I think Oprah is so amazing on so many levels. But apart from Oprah, and including Oprah, who else would you say have been kind of role models for you, particularly in your writing?
Oh, okay. Role models, and I mentioned Rosie Scott, a great Australian literary novelist. She was a playwright as well, but with an enormous sense of social justice. So I met Rosie on the board of the Australian Society of Authors. She was the chair at the time and mentored me through writing and also through the organisation. I would say I'm inspired by, obviously, my two greatest inspirations in my world, and particularly as a young writer, or young. My first book came out when I was 28, but youngish, would be Udjuru Noonuccal, the late Udjuru Noonuccal, who published the first book of poetry by a First Nations person in 1964, We Are Going, and the late Ruby Langford Ginnaby. And who published her first autobiography when she was 50 in 1988, Don't Take Your Love to Town. And that was on the New South Wales High School certificate for, about a decade. And both those authors, well, if I talk about Aunty Ruby, she really pushed the boundaries in Australian publishing by saying straight up to her editor, do not gubberize my text. And what she meant was, do not sanitize my text for a white audience. So her words on the page were very much what she spoke. And so much so, it was very conversational. So much reviewers criticised it because it's not being literary enough. But her work changed the landscape in Australian publishing, I believe. And of course, the late Udjeri Noonuccal was an activist, a poet, a children's author, an essayist. She wrote Dreamtime stories. And the breadth of her work and the way in which she tell stories through different formats. She wrote in We Are Going, there's an Aboriginal Charter of Rights, which is as relevant today as it was back in the 1960s. So I would say they were my two greatest influences, and I had the good fortune of meeting both those amazing women and spent a lot of time with Aunty Ruby Langford-Guinevere when I was doing my PhD on Aboriginal literature and publishing. So they would be my two greatest influences today. Yeah.
I must read the Ruby Langford. I've never read that one, and it sounds like an amazing.
Well, interestingly, because it came out the same year as Sally Morgan's My Place, which went on to sell 500,000 copies, two women with two very different stories, and it speaks volumes about the reading audience at the time, because Ruby Langford-Guinevere's work was very challenging to a white Australian audience. It was very hard life, where Sally Morgan's story was really about someone finding their identity, and she's done quite well, and she's very talented, and her children are very talented and done beautiful work as well. But there were two very different stories, and Australians, I don't think, were ready for what Ruby Langford-Guinevere had to say. And of course, we're in a different time now. And today we have a whole bevy of writers, a stable of writers kicking goals and at the highest level winning awards. We've got Melissa Lukashenko, we've got Alexis Wright and Tara June Winch, we've got Tony Birch, we've got Jared Thomas, we've got Ellen Van Neven. We've got so many, that's just like a handful, so many writers across genres. So that inspire me also.
Yeah, amazing. Just getting on to the final two questions, Anita, that I have for you. The first is something that you do talk a bit about in your memoir, and that is about your definition of success. And I wanted to just be able for listeners to hear that, what your definition of success is and how you feel your writing has been a part of that.
Okay. I will say that my definition of success has probably changed over time. When you're an emerging writer, you want... the success is getting published and getting reviewed and selling lots of books, but it has changed over time. A success to me is feeling that I've made a contribution to whatever the space that I am in, a contribution to that space. It also means that I'm doing well in terms of my mental health, that I haven't totally destroyed my mental health trying to reach a goal, and my emotional well-being is intact, and that there is joy in the experience. So that's quite a lot of expectations, but it is possible. I think, as I mentioned, the older I get, the more simplistic I've become in measuring success. Of course, in terms of my writing, I want to touch people through my storytelling. And while I don't write for awards, obviously it's wonderful to win, to get accolades from within the industry. But like publishing, judging is subjective. It's 3 people in a room or 4 people in a room, and you and I could be in a room together and choose different winners. So I don't get upset about those things because I know it is subjective. And I will say, however, that Bila Yarrudhanggalangdhuray, I think, has about 5 stickers on the front right now. And I always go, it's like a nice bottle of wine with all the things. So I think we've talked about Bila already, but success in that space wasn't so much about the awards, but it was about raising awareness around our Wiradjuri heroes and around language in that space. If I think about Tiddas, and I mentioned this earlier, I think that seeing my first play so well performed, so well executed by extraordinary actors and so forth in a well-respected theatre with an amazing director and dramaturgs and with standing ovations, like, for me, that was an incredible moment of success and possibly one of the highlights of my professional career.
Yeah, it must have been amazing. Just finally, Anita, what would you say, and kind of touched around this in a number of the different questions and things we've talked about, what would you say is at the heart of your writing?
Heart of my writing. One of the things I always autograph in my book often is, I hope this story speaks to your heart. So at the heart of my writing is a desire to touch the hearts and minds of readers in the hope that they think and see specifically First Nations peoples through a positive lens, through my lens. It's my lens. Everybody has a different lens. And my lens is looking through a lens of excellence, achievement, and also a lens of people having a right to place in the Australian narrative and world literature. So that was at the heart of my writing.
Yeah, fabulous. It's been so good to chat to you. And I know you're heading to Paris very soon. So did you say you're visiting a whole lot of libraries there?
Well, I'm going there to work on the new novel, but I need a strategy. Daily, you asked about the word count. I need a strategy. So I thought, I'll see how many public libraries are. So I just literally sent a tweet to some Paris account, saying, looking for public libraries. They got back to me that day with the link to the 59 public libraries. I go, here's the strategy. I'll walk to as many as I can for exercise, because I'm going to have lots of bread and cheese and croissants.
Yeah.
Probably. So and then I go, 1,000 words is, normally I aim for more, but I think, you know what, 59 libraries, 59,000 words, that's my strategy. I'm actually going to be working on 3 different books while I'm there, some edits and so forth. So the words may not be the actual novel, but I'll make sure I aim for that every day in some way, shape or form.
And are you going to be sharing that on social media?
I've just joined TikTok.
Okay.
Because they're all the rom-com people are meant to be. I'm going to do my first TikTok, I think, at the airport when I fly out. So I've set up a TikTok account, and then I'll do things on Instagram. And the hashtag will be Anita in Paris.
I love it.
It's Anita in Paris.
Fantastic. Have a fabulous time. Can't wait to see how it goes.